Thank you, Mr. Nicola Magnon. Our next speaker is Dr. Ayesha Khanna, co-founder of and CEO of Ado AI, an artificial intelligence solution incubator, also featured on Forbes magazine in 2017 as one of the 4 leading AI companies in Asia. She has been a strategic advisor on artificial intelligence, smart cities, and fintech to leading corporations and government. In her presentation, Smart Cities 2.0 using AI to build human-centric environments, she will discuss the paradigm shift in smart cities to an ecosystem-based model that is underpinned by data and driven by public-private sector partnerships. She will also provide case studies from Asia, where the intersection of rapid urbanization and digitalization is creating the new Smart Cities 2.0 paradigm. Let us put our hands together to welcome Dr. Ayesha Khanna on stage, please. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to talk about smart cities. I've been thinking about smart cities for over 10 years before they were a hot topic and on everybody's mind. And really, I want to take you through the journey of smart cities so that you can kind of understand how the notion has evolved. 10 years ago, we believed that smart cities were the ones that were built with a top-down, very large technical infrastructure that could only be done by very large firms. They would work with the government and these big companies would put the technical infrastructure in place. This is what it was all about. This is a cover of Barron's from 2011. And it was all about how IBM, ABB, Siemens, Cisco, all of these companies are going to help. But then it evolved. 5 to 7 years later, by the time I was working on my PhD, we began to see it now as more as a platform in which many participants could contribute, large and small companies, public and private agencies. And really it was about the data and how it was utilized that made the smart city livable, efficient, and productive. And for those of us in Singapore, we have evolved that even more. Some years ago, we started calling ourselves a smart nation. And the idea was to have a more holistic view, to perhaps move beyond just the infrastructure and built environment, and to think about the economy, our talent, our sustainability, and all those things. So I'm going to talk about some examples of this and make essentially 2 main points. The first thing that I'm going to talk about is the case of sustainable transportation. When you are working on artificial intelligence and you're helping a government or a city, you are trying to address a pain point. So for example, public transport company has a pain point. It wants to generate more revenue, it wants to engage customers, and it wants to solve the last mile problem. The last mile problem is what all of us have, especially when it's very hot, and we don't like to walk a lot and there are not enough biking paths, and then we have to call a taxi or we have to get off a bus and walk to our office or our residence. This is, by the way, a huge problem when planning transportation systems. Now, the good news is we have a lot of apps. We have e-scooter apps, we have bike-sharing apps, we have public transport apps, but they're all different apps. And this was a pain point that the public transport company decided it wanted to address because this was something that was constraining its consumers. And so the idea was, let's build a one-stop app which allows you to book any type of transportation. So you give it your origin and your destination, and it tells you what type of transport you should take to reach your destination in optimal time, optimal cost. Maybe you want to be more green, maybe you want to include your exercise goals in it, and it is able to allow you to book and pay for it all seamlessly. Now, when we design smart city applications for citizens, the citizens don't care about the complexity behind whatever you may be doing. Whether you're outfitting a building or you're working on a transport system, they just want convenience. And keeping that in mind is very important because ultimately you're designing a product or a building or infrastructure for citizens. And in this case, they wanted to search, book, and pay seamlessly in one app. But behind the scenes, this is what is happening. It's data integration. And because we are an AI firm, we work with lots of partners to integrate data. And this is very important. So you need traffic data, you need weather data, you need the data from e-scooters, companies, from public transport, from the trains, from the buses. And there's an element of negotiation and consensus and alignment that goes behind conducting this data integration. And once you've done that, then you can start using artificial intelligence. Because now you know how people are moving around the city, so you can make recommendations to them, you can give them discounted offers. They may have a preference, as I said, they want to be more green, or they don't mind spending more money, but they want to get faster to a place. And so we began to integrate, this is an NTU, and you can see that we helped the company integrate buses, trains, bike sharing, scooter sharing, on-demand shuttles, all of this to create an easier and more convenient way for the citizen to move around the city. Now, how can AI further boost the solution? Once you know how people are moving around, then you can actually do predictive analytics. And when you can do predictive analytics, you can optimize traffic so that there's less congestion, so that you can tell people that when there's an event or maybe when there are exams, students don't like to use bikes. In fact, they like to study and read in buses or autonomous vehicles, so we should have more of those at certain locations. We found out that students would be happy to take e-scooters if they were in a certain location. But the company had never thought of that, but by observing the behavior of the students, we recommended it, and the usage went up by 50%, and the students were very happy. And if you even take it further, where should you put your bus stops? Where should you have your next building? A number of these conversations should be based on the movement of people around the city, where they live, what their preferences are. Now, this was then the company that we were talking about, SMRT. It took a lot of bold leadership for them to do this. And then they spun out, and they are now called Zipster. It received funding, Series A funding by Toyota. And I think it's an example of how, with the right partnership, even companies, large companies, public transport companies can innovate and come up with partnership and ecosystem models that Highortha they had never done before. Now, once you start doing this, once you start building a platform, what's stopping you from adding more services? Now, let's say you could add driverless taxis to it. After that, maybe if you're in Dubai, you can add the Hyperloop train to it. So as you build these platforms that are essentially integrated ecosystems, you are now opening the door to a lot of smaller, bigger, private and public sector companies to come together. And then after that, you could put flying cars. I know we're experimenting with flying taxis here in Singapore as well. Or even more, you could even do car insurance. So you put a fintech layer on it, an insurtech layer on it. Again, the idea is more convenience for the citizen eventually. And this is all done through the use of data integration and through the use of artificial intelligence. So I think my lesson for the built environment would be that ecosystems of public-private partnerships make up the smart city now, not large companies or just government-led agencies. That the infrastructure itself is informed by data analytics and AI, and that multiple services can be layered, and if they're governed properly, can bring a lot of benefit to the citizen. Now, the second thing that I'd like to talk about as we're evolving this octopus almost of partnerships and services is that we need to make sure that what we do is human-centered. That the excitement about data and AI, as much as I, as a geek, love it, should not overwhelm the way we approach these things. So let's think about something together. We want to look after our elderly. Singapore has the world's third fastest aging population. So what should we do? Now, the old way of doing smart cities would be, let's put in a remote monitoring system. Let's put it so that we know they fell down. Let's put it if we know that, whether they are unwell or not. And this is very important, by the way, that this should be there. But in the old days, one would kind of stop here. That's not the right way to do it. Actually, the right question we should be asking is, what are the problems that the elderly face? Let's start not from the technology and AI. Let's start from them. And the three biggest problems that people have told me they face in Singapore are injuries. So it is important to have a safe, smart home, loneliness, and car accidents or traffic accidents. So now let's go back to dealing with these things. So for injuries, we have HDB smart-enabled homes that we're building. And the majority of Singapore lives in HDB housing. There's elderly monitoring system, and there are sensors on the home that alert your family if you've been injured or if there's any other problem, and you can reach out to a doctor. They're safe for the elderly to move around in so that they don't slip and they don't injure themselves. But it's more than that. Other things are also happening. We are building intergenerational playgrounds. This is an example of a child care center in a nursing home. What is the point of a smart home when you step out and you're isolated from the city? But when you step out and you've been okay, you haven't been injured, and you step out and you're in a playground and there are children and people, now that reduces your loneliness. Now you're going to live longer. Now you're going to be happier. And for that, you need sociologists to give you that kind of information. And then, of course, you want to be car light. We know that Tanga, which is Singapore's 24th HDB, is going to be a forest town. And these are some of the renderings. It's going to be green, sustainable, smart, and it's going to be car light. And in it, what are the people doing? So this is the kind of digitization of the service itself. The Singapore government is working on a Moments of Life app, which if you are a citizen over 60 or you have children under 7, you can download. And it's supposed to give you all your personalized needs and services on the app. So for example, key features are, what are the active aging programs happening around me right now? What are the discounts? What are the government schemes that I'm eligible for? And of course, there are a lot of digital readiness schemes to educate the elderly on how to use this. This is human-centered design. This is when you care about what people need and you personalize the services to them. And there's a lot of technology here. There's smart homes, there's driverless vehicles, there's integrated multi-use commercial and residential areas, but the team is interdisciplinary. They are AI people, they're engineers, they're architects, they're sociologists, they're lawyers, and I think there's a role for all of us to play in this smart city or smart nation which we're trying to build, and I think it's a great example for the rest of the world to look at as well. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is you're going to do all this, and you can't kind of approach it as the Wild West. If you're going to use data and AI, if you're going to have people like me building AI engines for people like citizens and you, well, then you have to govern bodies such as myself. And Singapore has done that. We just won an award from the United Nations as one of the first countries that has put an ethical framework or an ethics guideline for governments and organizations, how do you govern AI so that there's less manipulation, so that there's data privacy, and also so that there's enhanced security of information and infrastructure? I can't emphasize enough that there is no technology that is not a double-edged sword. And so constantly, it's not a battle between good and evil. The person who, or the country that, or the city, the mayor that governs the best is the one who can provide the benefits without suffering the unintended consequences, and can really benefit from what some of the wonderful things we saw Autodesk doing as well. So you have to have an interdisciplinary approach. You have to personalize, but you must govern it so that it's done correctly. And now that I've talked about me and you and cities, I want to talk about your journey. Each one of us are citizens. And it's very easy to hear us talk, and you're professionals. So it's very important, because professionals must empower themselves to learn the basics of AI. Otherwise, how will you take advantage of this opportunity? And more than that, how will you probe the biases that machines may have? I'll leave you with this picture. I have a charity. We teach girls coding and artificial intelligence. These are girls at Nyan Polytechnic. They're only 18 to 20. And when they started, we asked them, you know, all this AI and data, have you been reading about it? They said, yeah, we've been reading about it, but we don't feel good about it. We don't know if we can participate in that future. And then 10 weeks, 3 hours every Saturday, we taught them the basics. We taught them how to connect the dots between business problems and AI solutions, and how to think about it critically and ethically. And you should see them. This is their graduation. Big smiles, confidence. If you start the journey, put in a little bit of work, I can assure you that not only will your career be much more sound, you will be much more confident, and you will do a better job of serving the countries and cities that you serve. And I think it's very important, because without professionals, technologists themselves cannot do this job. So I look forward to all of us working on Smart Cities 2.0 and Smart Nation together. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ayesha Khanna. May I invite the speakers from the earlier sessions up on stage for the panel discussion, please? For the panel discussion, the moderator for this session will be Mr. Will Mills, Global Director, Future Growth at RICS. Will has extensive consulting experience across the built environment lifecycle in EMEA and Asia Pacific regions, and is committed to improving corporate performance and enhancing the built environment. To participate in this discussion, you may post your question through the IBEW 2019 application, or simply raise your hand and our friendly ushers will assist you. We'll appreciate if you could state your name, organization before posing the questions. I'll hand the time now to our moderator, Mr. Will Mills, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So 3 fantastic presentations there, guys. Thank you very much. We've got short-term things to think about. We've got the long-term picture. So why don't we start with today and maybe talk about some of the nuts and bolts. How is the impact of the digital revolution being felt today? Whether you're a designer, whether you're a contractor, whether you're a developer.
Sure, I'll oops, that's loud. You know, for me, if I look at our practice around the world, I would argue that every single bit is being impacted by the digital transformation of the past decade. You know, it's no longer a matter of being at the bleeding edge. Because when you introduced Revit 17 years ago, we adopted it, whether our clients wanted it or not, whether our engineers wanted it or not. That was a bleeding edge decision. But for all of us in this room, this is no longer bleeding edge. This is either you're in or you will be left out. And so for us, we're seeing that, and it's really, we've got almost 160 offices around the world, and it's becoming universal. So it affects the way we work with each other. It affects our practices as engineers, and I could keep going on, but let someone else speak for a second. There we go.
So we are in a slow-moving industry, and Chris said, we introduced BIM 17 years ago. It seems like a very long time, and it completely transformed the industry for sure. I mean, Arup was one of our first structural engineering customer, way back then. And certainly today, a lot of architects and engineers and mechanical engineers, contractors, fabricators use BIM. But if you look at the total stats, there's about close to 20 million professionals, and today still only a third of them use BIM. So even though it's common practice in a lot of the developed countries, but still, in emerging countries which have, large populations, the digital transformation didn't happen yet, for sure. In Singapore, for instance, BC and others were also, the leading, drivers that said, you have, to use BIM and, for permitting and things like that. So certainly governments have a pretty significant impact in terms of process change and driving adoption of this technology. And then the last point, what we started to see a lot more in the last few years, it's BIM started with architecture, then engineering, construction, etc. Today, owners started to understand the value of BIM, and that's why I spoke about the smart spaces. And Gartner speaks about digital twins, smart spaces in the top 10 strategic trends this year for the first time. And digital twin and IoT and smart spaces can only become real if you bring a digital transformation for owners in the future, because there will be such an explosion of data that you need to bring this type of technology to monitor, use, visualize, and later use for AI, for sure.
Can I ask? I just want to say, how many in this room? I'm going to have to look up for your phones for just a second, just everybody. If I think about what we just saw, how many of you in here know how to script or code? If you do, put your hand up really high. If you know how to script or code. So let me count. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That means, how many of you have staff members or have seen people coding? And how many of you have seen people coding? You might not know how to do it yourself, but it's part of your professional life. Thankfully, there's a few more hands went up on that one. Now, for me, when I think about, just to answer your question, just when you were talking with, you're helping young women become empowered by coding and becoming part of the modern world, it's for us as well. 10 years ago, we didn't have many people who coded either. But now, we wouldn't hire someone if they didn't know how to code. So this is a very interesting transition, and maybe, so this is...
You've actually highlighted part of the inertia with that show of hands, haven't you? I mean, you talked about acceleration, you talked about the 17-year journey. Actually, there's a big... how do we... Ayesha, you started touching on empowering the industry. Take us through that a bit more.
Well, I've also worked with banks in Singapore and in Asia. I sat through a couple of hours of presentations at a major bank yesterday where branch managers and others got together and began to think about how they could improve the customer experience in a bank branch in Asia. And they had all these ideas, but now they were learning the tools of the data exploration and then applying the modeling to it. What happened was, eventually, there are going to be automated tools for these kind of things. The idea is not to learn coding for coding's sake, or to learn data science for data science's sake. It is so that you can work with someone who is a coder or a data scientist, and that you yourself begin to know how to communicate with them and partner with them so that you can actually be part of the new data-driven services and products that are going to proliferate in cities. So I think that it's a bit hard, but you shouldn't think that, oh, I've never done this, so I cannot start it. It's really the way at least we do corporate training is with the data science engineer sitting next to you, and you just feel so much better because now you're going through the process, and you should have seen the excitement yesterday on these young people and the difference in the way they were speaking at the beginning 12 weeks ago and now. They had more confidence because it was data-driven, but also they were thinking in new ways that they hadn't because they hadn't been exposed to it before.
I think that's a really, really important point, which is a second group who put their hands up and those who didn't put their hands up is to understand the language and what's the potential. Because we have to be able to mix sort of wisdom, experience, and new ways of working, new tools. And I personally don't know how to code. You know, I can see it, I can pay people to do it, and I will help people do it. But it's exactly what you're saying there, Ayesha, is how we bring those two worlds together. And so my point in asking that question was not to make you feel bad. That's never my intent. It was just trying to say, make that step, like as we've seen on these Saturday morning classes, to talk to someone who is a coder, to get data scientists into your practice, whatever it is, or go to a course, spend a day doing a seminar to learn that vocabulary, to be part of the transformation. That was my point with that. Yeah.
So one of the themes that came through is around collaboration. We're in an industry that traditionally has an adversarial approach to things. It's quite fragmented between the various parties. How do we foster an environment that is a collaborative environment?
Well, all right. You got to put people in a room and have them talk. Right? First of all, I mean, just like this is you have to sit down together and have an intent to sit down and talk and a desire to work together. So that, to me, is the most important thing. And as we heard from Minister Wong yesterday, we've heard again and again that our industry needs to be transforming. So it's up to us. I think that's my first thing is intent. Right? Intent. Yeah.
So it's one of my favorite topics, collaboration. I think there are. So first, our industry is the industry that doesn't use data or doesn't centralize data for collaboration. We are one of the most decentralized industry if you compare to finance or manufacturing or other industries. We tend not to share data and information in the projects. There are a lot of legal constraints for sure. The good news is, starting in Europe now, there's actually an ISO standard, for how our industry will be able to, share and collaborate data. And it's, there's an official definition of a common data environment. There was, before something called, PAS 1192 that now became a standard that will, hopefully help architects, engineers, contractors to, provide, the data, to the owners of a project. So there will be a much better, framework and standards to do that. And then from a, technology standpoint, there are a lot of companies, provide, cloud platform, companies like Bentley, Trimble, Autodesk, and others, we all build, technology to facilitate, the mechanics of collaboration. But in the future, I mean, I think what we heard about, virtual reality, being the mechanism for collaboration is certainly the way, we see the future and what our customers want to do for sure.
Thanks for that. I'm going to pick up on the data privacy area because we have a question from Anonymous. So, panel, what do you foresee as the most valuable use of AI within the construction industry? I don't know if that's an AI question or a domain question, but panel?
Yeah, I mean, so what's great, there are a lot of startups, and actually if you look here, there are a lot of, sponsors and companies that started to look at AI, which is wonderful for the industry. And today we collect so much data on the construction side because you take pictures, you take picture all the time on the construction side. So today we see, there's a company in Cambridge, in Massachusetts, that it's called Smart Video, and they use AI to recognize, incidents on the construction side, but they also can detect if somebody doesn't have a hard hat or gloves or things like that, or if someone is on a ladder. So automatically with the pictures that you take on the construction site, you analyze all of these images with AI using pattern recognition, and you can start understanding potential risk. And this company, for instance, can predict how many fingers will be cut, on a construction site, or how many people will break their legs, or whatnot, because they can start using AI to identify patterns of, weather, people not wearing, safety gears, that kind of thing. So that's a good example. Us at Autodesk, we also develop technology that can predict other types of risk, being, delayed on a project. So if you have, this type of, subcontractor, or you use concrete versus steel or whatever in a region, we can predict risks for the contractors. There's certainly an issue about data data privacy, because contractors don't want to share their data to another contractor. So we analyze all of the projects of one company and we predict their projects. And I think it's going to remain a barrier for many, many years about people sharing this. And, it could limit AI in the next 5 years.
Thanks for that. Ayesha, there's a question specifically for you. Do you want to pick up the previous question first?
Well, let me, before you get to her, then I'm going to take.
Yep.
So for me, very specifically, people, process, product, AI, people, process, product. So it's going to help individuals become more efficient, more effective by augmenting what they're able to see and do. Okay, so I think we can no longer look at it as a replacement tool, but working with. I think this is really, really important. Process. This is going to be able to augment and reduce mistakes. For example, clash detection. All of us in here know that clash detection and buildability is a real pain. All right, so I think our AI, and I know the government's working on back-end tools for this, to have a single point to be able to submit your plans, and it goes to every department, so you get it all back without having to go through each department. This is going to improve the process tremendously. At the end, the product, I truly will believe, will be able to have optimized performance characteristics. When AI was going to help us with optimization of performance characteristics. I think those are the three things for me very, very concretely. I hope concretely.
Well, I think this question develops that theme, and it's is it too late for them to learn type question. It's how can built environment professionals like structural engineers apply coding in their daily work? Is it simply too late for them to learn?
No, it's never too late to learn. In fact, even after years of doing our PhDs, we're still learning. It's basically, we've entered this thing, and if you're in Singapore, there's Skills Future. We all have credit of at least $500. You can just go and take any course that you want, and it's absolutely not too late. The real important thing for professionals in an organization is that they want to understand how is it relevant to what I'm doing. And sometimes when they see these very theoretical courses, and at that point it's off-putting. So, that's changing slowly now. What's happening is that you're seeing courses that are specifically designed for industries. So for example, I was in a course with Neon Poly and CFTE that was specifically for banking individuals that explain to them the basics of AI in the context of their everyday world, in the lingo that they understand. And that really resonated with them, and then they began to work on those problems. I think for the construction industry, I would ask this organization to spend some effort, time, and investment into creating AI courses or technology courses or about tools that are relevant to the professionals, and then you'll see a great uptake. Because you will see what it can do, and immediately you'll be like, that's a problem, that solves this. And then you'll say, oh, that's a goal, I can use that. Because if you don't do it, then it's like watching a movie. It's very passive. And then it's just waiting for it to happen to you. Whereas if you take that first 2 or 3 steps, then you are not waiting for AI to happen to you, but you are going to make AI work for you. Till those courses happen, at a minimum, what I would recommend is that you subscribe to some magazines which talk about AI for the built environment or startups, or even there's MIT Technology Review, or you can go to TechCrunch. And what happens is, as you read about it, slowly, just one article a day, you'll begin to get into the mindset. And that is a great first start as well.
I completely agree with that, 100%. For the structural engineer, mechanical engineer, contractor, whatever, it's really about understanding a new vocabulary. Until one understands the words, it's this mystical thing. And it's not mystical, frankly. Most of these algorithms, it's just looking for patterns. It's pattern recognition, really. I'm being banal with it, and you can tell me I'm wrong. But it's not magic. And so make that effort and learn the vocabulary. I'll give you an example with a contractor. A contractor who came and said, Chris, I don't know anything about this. This is crazy. I said, well, why don't you take a few of your workmen, workwomen who are on jobs and ask them, what are some of the most difficult things that they have to do every day? And go sit with some data scientists and just have a conversation, have coffee, in this case, have some beer, and see what they talk about and see what happens. Within 3 months, they had a way in which they could test concrete mixes and test asphalt mixes without the men or women having to put themselves in danger or discomfort through sensors and new algorithms. So it was very straightforward, as you said before, looking for pain points, looking for challenges, and then using these new tools to find those solutions. So I mean, that's very, very specific, and I was like, wow, that's pretty cool.
So I'm actually a structural engineer, and I actually learned how to code. I spent half of my career coding, so self-taught. So I think structural engineers are designed to code, personally. It's not difficult. And actually today I wish I can code. I don't too much, but I think there are a lot of resources today. I mean, especially in the world of structural engineering, now companies develop tools where you can get your hands dirty. Tools like SketchUp and Dynamo, that kind of technologies. You can start solving concrete problems that structural engineers face every day. And then there are development platform, one of them is called Forge, that actually provides a bunch of components like a finite element solver or, different types of, viewers, etc., where you can very quickly start building applications that will solve, everyday concrete problems. So you can start at, any time.
Living proof. I'm afraid we're being dragged back to the collaboration and data security area. It's probably an overstatement to say the question is trending, but here we go. So AI needs data. What do we see the need of data sharing? It seems to be a huge challenge here. What can we do across the value chain in the built environment sector? So I guess we're fishing for ideas to encourage the sharing of data.
I can take a stab at it. So certainly, if you want to use artificial intelligence, machine learning, you need a lot of data. And the more data and use cases you have, the better your algorithm will perform. I showed an example of this robot that was, trying to, carry Legos. And we simulated many cases, thousands of them, so the algorithm, becomes better. So if we want to use AI for the built environment, whether it's, design or, predictive, maintenance, failure of systems, or, predicting risk on the construction site, you need a lot of data, that's for sure. And as I said, before, people don't want to share their knowledge and their IP. So that's going to be, a limit. That's our experience. And 90% of the people we talk to, they say, no, I can give the data only for my environment, but not share with my competitor. Even though I still think it's going to help the broader industry if people start sharing, and companies like Autodesk and many others, because everybody's on the same boat, can anonymize data and keep the data so it's not nobody steals your IP, but the broader industry could benefit from it. So I don't have a good answer for it. I hope that things will get better in the years to come. But you have more experience.
I think this is a really good question. And frankly, there are two things that one has to keep in mind when one is thinking about data sharing. One is the incentives to share data. Companies tend to integrate their services when there is some economic benefit to them. And that is something that we have seen in car sharing, we are seeing on the internet, we've seen on digitization and disruption of a lot of industries, including entertainment, and we'll begin to inevitably see that as it percolates through the industries that have been slower to adopt, like construction as well. So when private parties have an incentive to share for profit, then the second thing to keep in mind is regulation. And the regulation's interest is, of course, the public good, but also, in particular, the citizens' good. And in that sense, there is a new regulation in Europe, obviously GDPR, but there is PPDA here, and many other things that we need to keep in mind and comply to as you move from country to country. And as citizens, I would say that one should be very aware of these. And one should not, again, be passively, and I'm as guilty as anybody else. You download an iPhone app, and there's a long license agreement. You're like, I agree, So I think that we need to be more careful and understand. And over time, I think startups and companies will be forced to give this information in very understandable ways. What is the data we're giving away? I'm sure there's going to be a wallet that each one of us will have, a data wallet, and it will be much more about opting into certain services rather than opting out. And again, even people do it, individuals do it for when they're incentivized, either by security, by convenience, by some other kind of economic benefit as well.
So I'm going to add one other, if I can. All of us in this room share data both intentionally and unintentionally. So in one way, it's an absolutely correct question. On the other way, it's called a mute question. It's already gone. So the question then for me is, which typology of data are we talking about, right, within our industry? And there could be certain ways in which you estimate a job, so you can decide how much profit you're going to make or not, or how long a job's going to take. And you work on that either through experience or you've written up a spreadsheet or something. That's one set versus the cost of a unit. It's a different set. So I think the question is far more complex than that might just look like on the surface. So I agree it's a really important one, especially with cybersecurity, even more critical with digital twins. When the satellites stop working and the EMP hits us, whatever, then how things keep working. So this, cybersecurity is really important. We created at Air about 15 years ago a tool which allowed us to be able to look at information and data moving between, so data is just numbers, information is when you start to make sense of it, have information moving between different packages, whether it's from Autodesk to Bentley or to CATIA or whatever, because we used them all. And so it's that translation and interoperability, which is to me even more important, to make sure that as an industry, we're leading in the interoperability, right? The last thing I'll say on this is if you're so focused on protecting data, you will become the blacksmith of tomorrow. Everybody knows what a blacksmith was or is, but the only people who really care about the blacksmith are those who run horses or make little things in a fire.
I thought you were going to say the blacksmith there.
A blacksmith care too. But they're irrelevant for our society here. Irrelevant. They mean nothing. And so, so I think we've got to be really careful about you're not worrying about the wrong thing if you're trying to protect something that you consider so fundamentally proprietary that no one else is going to do it, because someone else will. That's what.
Thank you for that, Chris. I think there's a role there as well for independent professional standards and independent professional services. Of course, being with a professional body, I would.
I agree with that. I agree with that, 100%. Yeah.
So I'm going to go off-piste a little bit here. I love this idea of unintended consequences. And actually, Nicola, the first thing I thought with the robot and Lego is, does it cry when it runs out of bricks? And let's go into the future here. What are the unintended consequences of the digital revolution? I know that's such a hopelessly open question, but let's see what comes.
I'm sorry, I just keep thinking about the robot crying. I'm just thinking, or myself when I walk on one of those little Lego bricks that didn't get picked up. That they hurt. So as a futurist, one of the things we do try to think about are both the intentions and the unintended consequences of this. And I do believe that it's important to think about those. We're at a point in time where there's a lot of conversation about job replacement, job redundancy due to new tools, roboticization, fabrication, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the intended consequences that's muted could be really an evolution or revolution within our industry. So massive job losses. I used to be worried about that, frankly, as a potential unintended consequence, because as Arab, we have like 16,000 people around the world, and probably 5 or 6 are structural engineers, I'm not quite sure. And I used to be worried about them not having anything to do, because we can do 8,000 hours of work in about 8 seconds now. But the challenges which we're going to be facing as a global society are so huge, and the needs so big, that I'm not worried about that anymore. We're going to need every one of these tools to help us to be able to climate-proof ourselves or to find housing. We've got so many big challenges that I'm not worried anymore. So I think one unintended consequence could be talking about the wrong thing. As Minister Wong said yesterday, climate change is one of the biggest challenges we all face, and we need to face it. We can't ignore it, and we are at risk here, as many nations. It's not just here, but it's nations to the north and west who are running out of water. When you run out of water, you leave. You take your family and you go, because you search for a way to keep your family alive. And this is going to be a future which we're not talking about, right? This past summer, we had 1 million people moving. We're going to probably see in the next 25 years, 25 million people moving just in Southeast Asia. And so these are, unintended consequence of us not, the unpreparedness. I went really off-piste with that one. I'll tell you that. There you go.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we think a lot about the future of work and what it means, especially if you start using generative design and things like that. But one of the things we looked at was other industries and when they digitized, and it was interesting to look at the banking industry. And if you think 20 25 years ago, you had a lot of tellers, right, in the banks. And now, it's like ATMs, and then everything's automated, everything's in the cloud. So you don't need, as many people in the bank. And then there was a study that actually showed that, the employees in banks actually grew as they were automating and using technology and digitizing. So the industry, rebalanced, and then they had to hire a lot more people to do the new things because of the digitization. If we look in our world, BIM certainly changed a lot of the balance. Just like in the past, we had a lot of people using, typewriters, and now with automation, word processing, a lot of these, people, are not working anymore. And we see certain things like that with BIM, for sure. But we also see new jobs. We see like a BIM manager, like a BIM modeler, different types of people enter the market. So there's certainly there's a rebalancing about what people do because of technology. That said, if you look at the architecture, engineering, construction industry, right now, one of the biggest challenges worldwide is we don't have enough people, right? Every single of our customers ask us, how can we find people? Where can we find people? And it's a huge challenge. We spoke about, aging population. It's happening in many places. In England, more than half of architects are over 50. There's nothing wrong with it, right? But, they don't have, it's an aging, population, and they just don't know how they will bring, new blood. So I think in our industry, at least the AEC, I don't think there will be, a lot of unintended consequences around work, at least in the next decade. Well, I could be wrong.
Well, then I'm gonna. Sorry, if we don't change our image.
It's exactly that. That's why I like when you talk about VR, and because it's a way to attract young kids. I have 4 teenage daughters, and I know what I'm talking about, right? They want that kind of experience, and we need to bring technology that will attract kids,
right.
here. And the downturn 10 years ago didn't help us because nobody wants to go in this industry because we lost so many jobs in the downturn. But we need to change our image for sure.
Right, because at the end of the day, every one of us should want our son, daughter, cousin, cousina, whatever, to go into our industry. Right? This should be our goal. That every one of us would say to them, they should become a member of the construction industry. Because if you can't say that, then something's wrong. Right? And that we have to get to a point. So this is where one of the unintended consequences of not acting is that we become, this group down there instead of we help create society. Right? This is what we do. So
I think that this idea of talent evolution is very important. There are 2 aspects to it. One is to really value the people you already have, to make sure that the growth and the digital transformation of the industry is inclusive and that nobody feels that they're being left behind. And often this is through a combination of upskilling and providing them the tools and the time to catch up, because their domain knowledge, no young person can substitute for that. But then, of course, then it comes to how do we keep more young people when there's such a global war for talent. And I was listening to a very large insurance company. They were showing how they were recruiting in China and how people were using live stream on WeChat, where this young woman was talking about how being a broker for this insurance agency was interesting for her and what she liked about the culture and the values. It was very interesting. 1.5 million people watched that live stream, half of which watched it live. So I think that China is a great example of how you do recruitment through social media, through other things, to attract young people and talk about the mission and the values and the culture. And they are obviously very attractive when they feel that it's high tech and that they will get the kind of experience that will make them more relevant to the industry in the future.
Okay, now I've had a chance to think. So I'm going to give you two things on this one, if I can. All right, sorry. Unintended consequence, over-optimization. We become so optimized and that we become over-optimized. And if you look at some of our older assets around the world, they were never optimized. And so those warehouses can be turned into housing. They can be turned into your office in Boston, your future manufacturing facility, into restaurants, into clubs. If we optimize too much, I think we could have a problem. And the second one, which I worry about, is a loss of wisdom. If we become too dependent upon our tools to tell us what they're seeing, we might no longer look with our own eyes. And humans are incredible sensors. If you walk onto a construction site, a man or a woman who has some experience will have the wisdom to say, be careful of that, or let's go look at that, or that bolt's not going to work there. And so that is something which I think could be an unintended consequence, is a loss of wisdom.
So I might even spin that second one and say, do we risk actually an environment which is designed and operated by thinkers rather than feelers? It's people who are driven by knowledge and facts rather than emotions.
Well,
as the futurist,
I'm not sure about that. We all have a right brain and a left brain, right? So I'm hopeful that our society will continue to be a negotiation between both sides of our brain. So I'm less worried about that one. I'm not going to answer that directly for you there, Chief.
So I think I read some stats recently. So some people predict that by 2030, half of the jobs will be based on AI, and they encourage kids that are more thinker, to your point, to move into the AI industry. And then there are jobs that AI cannot address. It's jobs of caring for people, like the nurses and in healthcare, and then they encourage kids that are more feelers to go into these other industries. But it was pretty scary to see that they were predicting that half of the jobs in 2030 will be around AI.
So I'm going to move on to a different area now.
All right. Our last 5 minutes. Here you go. All right.
So the question I have is, we're here in Singapore, developed country. Is this digital revolution going to happen here or be different here compared to other places in the world where perhaps the infrastructure may or may not support it as well?
And look, I think that Singapore has made a lot of great strides, and they have evolved and gone through the very journey that I talked about by having a holistic approach to smart cities and to urban digitization that is beyond just technology, but is about the economy, it's about sustainability, it's about human-centered urban design. They are providing a great example that other cities can tailor according to their own needs. So in that sense, Singapore is a leader, but it's not cookie cutter where you can see what's happening here. It can automatically happen in Jakarta or Karachi or even San Francisco. So I think we need to be authentically true to the needs of both geographically and as a society and culturally of any particular city.
So I'm going to give. I have had the privilege of working with different ministries over the years, past 20 years here, and the direct answer is you have some of the best bureaucrats in the world. It's incredibly fortunate to have individuals who are so smart and who care so much about making sure that Singapore is a nation for its citizens and a leader in the world. And I put hand on heart, this is absolutely the case. It's also small enough and big enough. It's small enough that if decisions need to be made or ideas need to be promulgated, it can happen. It's not like North America or South America where you put a pebble in one part of a pond, you never know where in the heck it's going to go. So things can happen here once there's a will. And so I think this is, with the digital transformation, I truly believe that the nation can, for itself and for the region, establish a leadership position by showing how things can be done. And I really, really, truly believe this. And it's also a very thoughtful group. When the URA asked me almost 15 years ago to help think about what was an autonomous vehicle strategy be for the nation. This is when Smart Nation was being, and I really thought about it. It wasn't just like, let's try it, let's tweet it and see what happens. Let's truly think it through. And so I think when we're looking at this digital transformation, this isn't just all of a sudden out of nowhere. This is a really, truly a thoughtfully, carefully considered move for helping the market to move. So I think the answer to that is absolutely yes. This is a place. And it's true that this is the stability here, the rule of law here is quite clear, and some other nations around, it's not so clear, and how we work is not so clear. But to be the exemplar and to spread that is, I think, the right aspiration and the right direction to travel.
Chris, I think given the theme of the day and the theme of the summit, that's probably a nice place for us to finish. So can I thank Nicola, Ayesha, and Chris for your insight today? Very thought-provoking. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks, Will.
Let us put our hands together to thank our speakers and moderators for the informative session.